I'm gonna give it a minute, letting people know that I'm in and give people time to join. Um, so this has been an interesting month. I am excited about the people we've reached with the conference. I've heard from a number of people that it's opened their eyes to what therapy is like, and the things that we would normally talk about in therapy, and that therapists are not trying to commit you against your will. They're there to help and move you forward in whatever that process is. And specifically, we talked about healing right now. And my first mind was to postpone everything in regard to this conference, simply because what we are experiencing right now in this country in regards to the killing of unarmed Black men or non-threatening Black men at the hands of police or at the hands of vigilantes, so to speak, it's overwhelming the community that I belong to. But after meditation, after some just clearing of my mind, I also realized that it is imperative that we continue the conversation of healing. And it's imperative because if we don't, we become stagnant. We don't make the changes we need to make. We don't do the things we need to do to push change forward. So part of the change that we need is also part of the healing that this country needs. And I think that if we start the process to change what is continually putting us in the position we are in right now, we also have a process of healing. I'm just going to say that I saw a post where someone talked about Lauren. She said, how does rioting and tearing down your own community change anything? How does it help? And someone's response to that was, when they were kneeling, you didn't like that either. And it's true. People boycotted the NFL because they allowed Kaepernick to kneel. Then we boycotted the NFL because Kaepernick didn't have a job the following year. And what we ultimately have right now is no change. Yes, progress. Yes, the needle has moved. Yes, there has been quicker responses to situations like this. But is that really an indication of change, or the change that needs to happen in our society at this point? And I'm going to say the progress that has been made in my mind is not because things are changing. It's because people don't want, it's the public perception of things not changing that is driving these strong reactions, the immediate firings, we're gonna bring them up on charges. So I don't know that I'm really gonna ever be satisfied until we just stop it. I want it to stop. And I think that, yes, we can talk about it all day. We can implement things that will, show evidence of progress, but it should just stop. And I think that will satisfy the masses at that point. But I don't want to get too deep into that topic just because it's super emotional, and it can distract from what I really want to talk about. I shared the surface of my trauma so to speak, my healing process and dealing with self-inflicted wounds the other day. And it wasn't easy, but what it also brought to the surface for me was the things that I had suppressed, the things I haven't talked about, the things I didn't want to share, the things that were hurting me, that for the sake of keeping the peace for everyone else, I just shut up about. What it brought to the forefront was that I continued to struggle with imposter syndrome because of my idea and expectation for perfectionism. Tonight I was on a national call about mental health and keeping it together. Obviously, we touched on this subject because it was through a campaign for Black male achievement. So there was a focus on, we talked about how we cope right now during COVID, where African Americans are dying at alarmingly high rates, or contracting COVID at alarmingly higher rates than our counterparts. We talked about seeing so many cases so quickly on the news of the very thing that we've been fighting against for, I can honestly say, a decade. What troubles me is the stuff that we don't see, the things that aren't recorded, the things that don't get brought to national news. That worries me, because we know it was 5 this month, but it could have been 25 because we don't know. But on this call, we landed with the idea that we've got to focus on healing as a race, as a country, as a people, because that's what in fact will push change forward. So some of the things we've discussed in this conference, we've talked about childhood trauma, we've talked about healing from grief, we've talked about healing from the unknown, and now this week, self-inflicted wounds. To me, healing from the first 3 are easy because you can pinpoint the source. Maybe you pinpoint the source. The unknown is a little different because you have to go in with this open mind. But for me, grief, childhood trauma, understanding that I've got a diagnosis or I'm dealing with depression or something like that, those are the simple things. The hardest part is owning your role in your mental stability, your mental wellness, whatever word you choose to use, whatever that looks like for you. Having to take a step back and say, I have done this to myself. I've put myself in this place on my own. There's no one to blame. There's no one to point the finger at. I've allowed these things to fester in my life. I've allowed these things to take over and take control in my life. Without acknowledging that I'm doing it. So when I talked on Monday about not asserting myself in relationships, beginning with my relationship with my parents, I brought that forward in so many ways. I brought that forward in my life, in work relationships, in romantic relationships, in friendships. And I've allowed me not asserting myself to make me feel like this person is not allowing me to grow with them. And it wasn't their fault. They're not responsible for my growth. They're not responsible for my healing. And I think that's something we all have to kind of understand, is that no one is responsible for your healing. No one is going to step you through that process step by step other than your therapist. Yes, it's great for you to grow, but if you're waiting on someone else to allow that for you, it's kind of one of those things. Growth is when you learn to accept apologies that you never get. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about growth and healing and learning and moving forward. Accepting that you do some things to other people that trigger them to do things to you. That's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, but it's important, because your behavior and how you accept and do things is going to be vital and crucial and whatever word I can use that makes it important to you, to move forward. You know, sometimes I talked about this on this last call, and one of the things we had to do was list 3 things that we think are important to mental stability. My first thing is becoming aware, sitting back, taking it all in, breathing through a situation, and allowing yourself to become aware of what it is you are feeling in this circumstance. So if I go to this place all the time and I feel anxious, I've got to stop, breathe through. Okay, I'm anxious in this space. Why? What is happening? What is making me anxious? Is it a person? Is it I don't like this side of town? Is it what's going on outside? Is it the food? What is it that is making me anxious about being in this space? After what it is, saying it out loud, acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is going to go so far in healing. Acknowledging that you are in pain is important. And it's hard to do for us mentally. It's hard to say out loud emotionally, right? You know, if you broke your leg, you don't tell, I broke my leg. Like, that's the first thing out your mouth. I think it's broken. I think it's broken. But when you are hurt, when you're grieving, it's hard to assert that for some reason. We've made that taboo to say I'm angry. We've made it taboo to say this person hurt my feelings, or I don't really like this situation. I'm anxious about this. You know, I can remember joking about this with a lot of people last year. Every time I would get frustrated last year, especially the last half of last year, and I would get to this point, and in my head, I would scream out, my grandmother died, right? Had nothing to do with the situation. It had nothing to do with, you know, stress at work. It had nothing to do with a dating issue or a friendship issue. But in my mind, the pressure I would feel would always lead me back to, I just lost my grandmother. And in my mind, that should have been enough, right? That should have been that thing that made people leave me alone. But what I now recognize is I wasn't dealing with that grief. I wasn't dealing with what that meant to me and all the underlying things that triggered. Losing my grandmother, you know, it triggered some childhood stuff. It triggered some insecurities. I never knew what a world would be like without her. I never imagined it. I never considered it. I never thought about it. So it triggered some insecurities in me that I needed to speak out loud, but I kept doing it in my head instead of letting that go. Who did I finally let that go to? My therapist. My therapist is what kept me from going further into my break than I already was, because it was happening, right? One of the other things that we've got to learn to do is accept things. And when I say that, I'm not saying accept less than and, you know, settle or anything like that. Accept that this is where you are. Accept that this is hurting you. Accept that you haven't healed from that thing. Accept that this is not what you wanted it to be. Am I saying accept it and don't try to change it? No. But accept that it is. Now, you got to assess whether or not this is something you can change. Too often, we spin our wheels trying to fix things that are out of our control. Unfortunately, what's happening in the news, the only control we have is to go vote. The only control we have is to keep bringing it up and keep pulling it out of the darkness and into the light. That's the control we have. We can't change other people's perceptions of it. We can't change people's opinions of it. We can't change the way it is ignored by others. All we can do is keep putting it out there. So we can go vote. We can contact all of our legislators, all our elected officials. But in this moment, we can't bring these people back. We can't change what happened to them. We just only can do what we can do to move the needle some more, to enact change in our lives. And I think that we have to focus on that moving forward. Part of healing is accepting those things. We talk about the serenity prayer all the time, but some of us don't live that prayer. Accept the things I cannot change. um, the one part of that is the wisdom to know the difference. That doesn't come easy. Something that I don't always talk about and don't always, harp on is the importance of a connection, a spiritual connection. That has helped me heal. That has allowed me some freedoms. And I've shared before that I didn't learn to pray effectively until I just started having conversations with God. And that came out of an anger that I wasn't getting resolved. The one thing I can say, you can work through your issues with humans, with a therapist. That relationship with God takes you actually going to God with it. Yes, people can help push you along. People can advise you. People can steer you in the right directions. People can direct you into scripture. But if it's an issue you have with God, you got to take it to him. You got to have the conversation with him. Like last year, I went through so much. 2 months, I would say it every day. I am angry with you. I'm so angry with you. And at first it felt like, why do you keep telling him that? He already knows, right? But just like in your human relationships, sometimes they know up front what's working and what's not working. What they're waiting on is for you to say it's not working so they can talk more about how to fix it or how to make it work. You can't be with God the way you are with people. And it's crazy to be that way because God knows, right? Like he's God. So he knows you're angry. He knew you were going to be angry before the situation ever took place. So that awareness, the acknowledgement, the acceptance. To me, those are the first 3 steps in healing. Those are the first 3 things we got to deal with in order to start the process of healing mentally, to find instability, to find wellness. Because if we don't do that much, we're setting ourselves up. I can't go to my therapist and tell her everything is okay and expect her to help me heal. If I tell my therapist, I'm good, nothing happened. I love my job, I love my kids, I love my family, I love my boyfriend. I don't have one. But, if I tell my therapist those things, and the truth is my job is stressing me out, the truth is I kind of don't want to be around my family right now, how can they help me through that? So those are the things that we need to be taking to our therapist. That's what we talk about when we talk about doing the work. Your therapist can only do what you allow them to. They can only help you step through the things that you want to step through. You can, and I do it with mine all the time. I set some clear, okay, we're not going there right now. I don't have the mental capacity. My heart ain't in that. We can focus on this though. You're paying for this therapy, so you might as well make it work in your favor. You might as well make those things happen the way they need to happen, because if you don't, you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time, you're blocking somebody else from that hour that you're taking out of that therapist's time, wasting it. They need the help too. They're not like doctors. They can't schedule 4 or 5 people an hour. They got an hour with every one of us, and we need to make the best of that 60 minutes because it's important for us to move forward. This is something, what do I do when I see this kind of stuff every day in the news? What do I do every day when I'm watching the news and it's nothing but bad news and it's hurting my feelings and I'm watching my community suffer and I'm worried and I'm scared for my life and things like that's what you take to them. I want to make sure that I step through some of the highlights of this conference. Janae talked at length about what we need to be doing when it comes to finding help, right? Talked about being able to trust your therapist, you know, establishing a trusting relationship there, finding a community, a circle of trusted friends, like how important it is to have the support, because some of us are dealing with some deep stuff. You know, you didn't get in that situation by yourself. It's very unlikely you're going to get out of it stepping through it alone. So I think it's important that you remember that. Like, if you can't trust your therapist, there's an issue. If you go into them for a lifetime and you don't feel like you're progressing and healing, you might need to consider finding a new one. Now, do you have trust issues? That's a question you need to ask yourself as you step through this process. Because if you have issues of trust, there are going to be things you have to do differently. I have had to learn to stop myself and say, is this me or is this the circumstance? Is this real or is this in my head because of something that's happened to me in my past? So I don't want to be on here too long, but I think that we have to push this conversation forward. We have to keep talking about healing in order to heal. We have to keep bouncing ideas off of each other and sharing things we do to cope with different. For me, healing from everything else has been fairly simple. You know, learning to assert myself has been pretty good. It's been pretty freeing. But, you know, this notion of living up to an expectation that I can't live up to, that's something that weighs heavily on me, and it's something I have to deal with consistently. But the only way I'm going to deal with that is with the help of my therapist, by acknowledging when I'm slipping and when I need that additional help, and with the support of the people around me. So again, while we are dealing with COVID and police brutality and racial tensions and political division and all of the things that we see every single day and we hear about every single day, we talk about every single day, we're not even talking about just daily life, you know, daily things that are happening. You know, we're losing loved ones that aren't passing from COVID, just the natural order of things. We need to start and continue to have conversations about healing and mending relationships, healing and mending your spiritual connections, healing and mending the things that you need to do within yourself, forgiving your friends, forgiving everybody else. So that's what I want to leave with you guys tonight. We will finish out the conference. In all honesty, I kind of feel like we have, you know, I wasn't expecting this to happen during the month of May. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, and so much of what we are going through as a people, as African Americans, speaks to what this country is going through, because we are a part of this country. So I think this is a time for everyone to put some action behind healing and moving forward. And I'm not saying that to minimize things. I'm not saying that, oh, if we heal and kumbaya, this stuff goes away, because that's not what it is. But for this to have happened during a conference about healing from so many different things, I want to close it out by saying we've got a lot of work to do as a society to push the conversations about healing forward, but we've got a lot to do individually as well. And I wonder, if we start the work individually, how well we will do as we progress as a society. So with that, I am going to close out the conference with just a call to action for everyone to step in, learn from each other, acknowledge what is happening in our community, acknowledge what's happening in our country. Speak up, share, listen. I'll say that again, listen intently, not just to reply or rebuttal, but to hear what's coming from someone else, hear their side of the story, understand where they're coming from, listen to their heart, not just their words, watch their body language. We've got to start somewhere, and I think that's how we start this process of healing, is to just stop for once and listen and take the actions that are necessary um, to make change. And the only way we change is to heal. So I'm going to just leave it with that. The only way we change this narrative and we stop seeing this is for this country to heal from what are centuries deeply rooted trauma against African Americans, against Native Americans, against people of color in this country. And I think once we start that conversation, we can move forward with all of this. Again, the title of this conference was Search, Expose, and Heal. And it came from a meditation. I'll reiterate that. It came from a meditation I did at the beginning of the year, where we were guided to search our hearts, ask God to search with us, ask Him to expose the things that needed changing, that needed to be fixed, and begin the process of healing. And that is what I pose to everyone, to search your hearts. Expose the things that you know need to heal. Expose the things that you know need to change in this country so we can start the process of healing. So, thank you for your support. Thank you for joining us every night over the last month. Thank you for your feedback and your comments. I will use this platform again for various topics. I like the way this went, and I think that we've gotten a hold of the technology well enough to where we can have some very engaging and productive conversations. And I look forward to seeing and hearing from all of you again. Thank you, and have a blessed night.